The following presentation is an exclusive interview with the world-renowned founders of the International Centers for Attitudinal Healing, Dr. Jerry Jampolsky and Dr. Diane Cirencioni. Together they have taken the concept of attitudinal healing to over 50 countries and have inspired the creation of over 100 centers for attitudinal healing around the world. Do you want to find happiness through a new approach to life, to change negative patterns into positive ones, and to turn your world into a joyous experience? Let's explore with Dr. Jampolsky and Dr. Cirencioni, as interviewed by me, Dr. Terry Shintani, on Hawaii's longest-running health show, Healing and You. These lessons can help you experience life as fully and as peacefully as it can be, starting right now. Welcome everyone to Healing and You. I'm Dr. Shintani, and I want to welcome you to this show. Tonight we have a very, very special program for you. We have two members of our faculty at the John A. Burns School of Medicine's Department of Complementary Alternative Medicine, and we're very proud to have these two distinguished faculty members. They are Dr. Jerry Jampolsky and Dr. Diane Cirencioni. Dr. Jampolsky, Dr. Cirencioni, thank you for being with us this
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Just by way of introduction, Dr. Jerry Jampolsky is the founder of Attitudinal Healing. He's a Stanford-trained psychiatrist. He has won numerous awards, including the AMA, the American Medical Association's Pride in Profession Award. It's actually a national award, so we're very proud to have him as one of our faculty members. Dr. Diane Cirencioni, Executive Director of Attitudinal Healing International. She's a clinical psychologist, and she's actually practiced in Hawaii. Together they've written numerous books, and some of them are Love is Letting Go of Fear, a mini course for life, Teach Only Love, Love is Letting Go of Fear, and numerous titles that you can find on the internet or at Amazon about the whole concept of attitudinal healing. And together they founded over 100 centers for attitudinal healing around the world, and have lectured in 54 or 50 plus countries. They have an imposing resume of work that they've done. And several years ago at the World Health Awards, together they won the Integrative Medicine Award. So welcome, Dr. Jampolsky, Dr. Cirencioni.
Thank you. Dr. Shintani, it's our pleasure to be here again. Thank you.
For tonight's topic is letting go of the illusion of separation. And it's a very interesting topic, and it's actually applicable to many people in terms of dealing with illness, dealing with loss or grief, and dealing with challenging relationships. Now, can you tell me why you picked this interesting topic, letting go of the illusion of separation, for this show?
Well, as you mentioned, regardless of what we're dealing with in life, things look like they're so separate. Dealing with illness, the loss of a child, the loss of a spouse, the loss of a friend, our challenging relationships, whether they're business or personal, that looks very different than illness. Financial difficulties, losing our jobs. But there is something very common that underlies all of the fear around these situations, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And under each one of these is a specific fear. If your child or someone you love is life-threatened, the fear is the fear of separation from that person. If you are financially strapped or you're losing your job, fear of separation from your lifestyle, from the financial security that you normally have. Okay. If no matter what the area is in our life, there is a sense of being separated from something or someone. And we're going to talk tonight about how this idea of separation permeates our thinking, and it comes out in the form of loss, comes out in the form of grief, and whether it's the separation we fear from something or someone, or ultimately the separation we feel from ourselves, our higher selves, our inner selves, our natural selves, and how that projects out. So how can we deal with that in relationship to loss and grief and illness, etc.?
So you're saying the fundamental common element is the fear that is generated from this illusion of being separated from something that we
Exactly.
are accustomed to.
Up to and including our own death. We think it's the fear of death,
Yeah,
but what is
boy,
the fear
that's
of
a whole
death? But
nother-
it's the fear of being separate from this life, being from our bodies, going into an unknown. So yes, it's gigantic.
It cuts across many areas of our lives.
Exactly, and it's one that we hardly ever talk about. So there's a lot of denial around it. So we try to make it really simple in the sense of how can I identify this in my own life, and then what can I do about shifting my attitude about how I deal with these things so that I can actually enjoy living before I die.
That's great. That's wonderful. Dr. Jampolsky?
So it's really our belief that our true identity is just a body born to sooner or later to die, sooner or later to be rejected, sooner or later to be sick. And as long as we hold on to that kind of identity and feel that's our only identity and continue that fear, we end up with controlling problems. We try to control everything in our lives and find out that we're not very successful at controlling other people. And attitudinal healing is really based on the premise that it's not people or other things that cause us to be upset. It's not our bodies that really cause us to be upset. It's the attitudes and thoughts in our mind that cause us to be upset. And if you think about it for a moment, that if we stopped making judgments, stopped condemning ourselves, having grievances with other people, can you imagine how peaceful we would feel and how much more joy and feeling and experience oneness? It's my feeling that the more that we can see other people as a Siamese spiritual twin of ourselves, that when we get upset with another people, really hurting ourselves, not other people. So what we'd like to talk about tonight is suggesting that we might take another look at what this is all about. I was born in a family that were very fearful of dying, and I picked up that fear for a long time.
Well, who isn't afraid of dying, right? That's a very general, common. I mean, that's almost programmed into us from our birth.
Yes, but Terry, a lot of people deny that, and they're not consciously aware of that fear, and yet it plays a big part in their own behavior. So in my adulthood, I became an alcoholic, and I was afraid to die, and yet I was killing myself with alcohol. And if I had continued, I would have died from alcoholism. So we have kind of crazy mixed up minds that are based on fear. That's all based on this identity that we're a body. Now in attitudinal healing, the first principle that we have there is the essence of our being is love. And for me, that means we're spiritual beings, that we can choose to be a spiritual being. See, that is our identity rather than a body. The first meditation we do in the morning that Diane and I do is, want to share that, Diane?
Well, it's this little statement that says, I'm actually not a body. I'm not just a body, that I'm free. And I'm still as God created me. And today I want the peace of God. The peace of God is everything I want. And it's the aim of all my living here, the end I seek. And it's my purpose, my function in my life. And that basically sets you right, whether it's God, nature, whatever one believes. One doesn't even have to be faith-based to relate with that. That we set the goal, the rudder in the boat, as Jerry often says, to have peace of mind as our goal that day. That, instead of all the other goals that we set up, it doesn't mean passive. It means that everything else is our intentionality of what we do, but that at a core level, to be peaceful, we have a harmony, integrity in what we think, what we say, and what we do.
So to reiterate, if rather than making the goal a certain kind of outcome for the day, or which could go your way and could go the other way, which may create stress and distress, if the goal is peace, then you can be peaceful no matter what the outcome is. That
exactly, that's a very succinct way of saying it, and not to be interpreted with not putting in a lot of effort, because Jerry and I, we accomplish a tremendous amount of things in our lives, but the difference is that how peaceful do I want to be in the process? And if you're only rigidly held to one belief of this is all I want to do today, well, yeah, you might do that, but you might miss something else. But if you hold open the possibilities, we believe there are more resources in the universe to help us than only our own will. So we we try to open up the space for everything to help.
You know, what you both just said just reminded me of a very ancient saying. I don't know if you're even aware of it, but it's in one of the most ancient books, the Bhagavad Gita. And it goes, "Be ever the same in gain or loss, in victory or defeat, in pleasure and pain, but ever be prepared." And it's like you're saying the same thing in today's
Yes.
common language, so that you can bring that ancient wisdom into modern practice. It's actually wonderful.
I think that's what attitudinal healing is about, and the 12 principles of attitudinal healing. It's all about taking universal principles and applying them to everyday practical life.
That's great.
Children have great wisdom also, children who are just normal, ordinary kids. And there was a kid named Greg Harrison that was dying of cancer, and someone asked him, "Well, what does it feel like you're going to be dying?" And he said, "Well, I think what we are is that these are just superficial bodies, that when you die, you just let go of this body, which was never real in the first place.
Wow.
And then you're at one with all souls, and then sometimes you come back and act as a guardian angel to someone." And my belief system, and Diane's, is that Greg acts as a guardian angel to us. And I think it's a pretty wise way of looking at that, to see that these bodies are just costumes. And when we let go of this and see the light in other people, one of the principles in our book, A Mini Course for Life, in the 18th lesson, it says, "I choose to see only the light in you and recognize that it's only a reflection of the light in me." So healing the illusion of separation is not seeing in people's behavior, but to be willing to each moment to have peace of mind, where we're not trying to change other people, but as we change our mind through forgiveness and not getting caught in the anger that we oftentimes feel, and let go of that and just see the light in people, we begin to experience a sense of oneness. And that sense of oneness allows us to not get caught in feeling that there's anything such as death, because the bodies are not real, they're just an illusion. And if we really began to see that, we begin to lose our fear of dying, and we lose to feel that love is eternal. And when you think love is eternal, and you begin to see love is the answer to any problem we're going to face in this kind of illusory world that is so filled with fear and impossible solutions, because we continue to believe in anger, we believe in battle, we believe in wars. And so the healing doesn't come from changing the world, it comes from changing our own mind. And as we change our mind, we change the world.
Wow, that's incredible. And I had to say, what incredible wisdom from a little child. It's saying something with that kind of depth of understanding of the world and the universe and how life works. That's a lesson for the ages that even adults often barely grasp.
Well, he was out of denial. So he knew he was going to die because they were stopping the treatment. And so he was able to come to terms with it. And we were talking about before about the fear of dying, and I don't believe that everyone's afraid of dying, because I think it depends on your belief system. And some people are faith-based, and even people that aren't necessarily afraid of it, but at least they've come to terms with it. The fact that the body is going to end. It's a very comforting thought to think that part of us, some level of consciousness, goes on.
Boy, and if you can...
But you and I were raised differently. And
Yes.
I was raised with a lot of fear about dying, and you never really felt a fear of dying.
No, I've never been afraid of dying.
Why is that
amazing.
then?
No.
Yeah.
I believe my mother was never afraid of dying. I don't think my father was either, but we never talked about it. But my mother was clearly never afraid of dying, and now she's 90, and she was very ill a year or two ago and almost died 3 times, and I actually saw that she really isn't afraid of dying.
It's amazing.
And in watching her, she watched her father, who wasn't afraid of dying. And so I'm watching her, and I'm not. And it's very comforting. I think, when you come to terms with the concept of dying, you're able to live your life with much more joy.
And again, getting back to the theme, you're eliminating the illusion of separation of
Yes.
yourself from your physical body.
Yes.
When you're watching a beautiful sunset, you lose all sense of time.
Right.
You lose all sense of past and future. You're not thinking of your body. you're just feeling something that's out of the body, that's very high spiritual kind of feeling. Now, if someone comes along from the University of Hawaii and says, "I'd like you to analyze every sunset you've seen," all of a sudden you start to analyze it, and you lose the peace and the joy from that experience. So we're talking about letting go of the intellectual mind that sometimes interferes with our taking on a new belief system. So we believe that for us to let go of the fear, it's helpful to start the morning with a to-be list rather than a to-do list. And by that I
That's
mean...
interesting stuff there. It's a to-be list.
Yeah.
rather
Yeah,
than a
Jerry made
to-do
that up.
list.
I think it's fabulous.
That's
it's changed our
beautiful.
mornings.
That's beautiful.
Yes.
Talk more about that, Jerry.
So what would happen if we said, I'm going to remind myself my being is unconditionally loving, unconditionally forgiving, unconditionally gentle and kind and generous and open-mindedness and compassionate. Wouldn't we start living that day as if we were joined with each other and see that as a reflection of ourselves, rather than doing what many of us do, and we get caught in that too. We're not there all the time, but when we see something in another person that we're attacking them about, oftentimes it's a reflection of something we're feeling about ourselves, and that we're only projecting it out there.
Often or always? We're just being gentle. It's actually always.
But we hide that awareness from
Right.
ourselves. So again, we like to suggest that it's possible to start the day having peace of mind as our only goal.
Right, and actually that's actually a revolutionary concept, because people think it's revolutionary to say, okay, I'm going to have my to-do list, and you number them and you put them in priority of the most important thing first, and you go down and check your list off.
Yeah.
But I think it's far more important to have a to-be list. That's a wonderful concept.
It's amazing, Dr. Shintani, how much you accomplish with the to-be list versus the to-do list. We know that your lifestyle is extremely busy. People can't even comprehend how much you do. But Jerry and I also, as you mentioned, the number of countries. It's actually, outer Mongolia was our 55th country, which we just returned from. And so we have 30 years of an incredibly busy life, and if not, and of course before we met each other too. But this to-be list has, I want to say that it's calmed the pace. Because we're accomplishing, I feel like I accomplish more now than I did before, when I was double tasking and triple tasking.
Anyone who sees the resume of the two of you wonder, how in the world did these two people do it in a lifetime? It's amazing. Yeah,
we're just very old.
Well, it's helpful to remind ourselves. It's helpful to remind ourselves during that last day of our life, we're really not concerned about our to-do list, how much we've accomplished, how much money we have in the bank. What most people are concerned about is their loving relationships that they have. That is what really becomes important. But they don't live their lives that way. They live their lives as it's more important to how many books you sell or how many things you've accomplished. And the more we start emphasizing the being, and to recognize that our heart is always full of love. We're born with the essence of love. We're born with that innocence. And when we remind ourselves there's that innocent child in each of us, and we can see that innocent child in another person, we stop worrying about death. We stop worrying about the negative things in life. We begin to experience a sense of joining and oneness that makes us even feel more peaceful. And then the more that we give other people, the more we feel joy. It's the highest form of joy, I believe, is voluntarism, helping others as we learn to help ourselves.
Well, Jerry, on that to-be list, one of the things, yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things you did mention is that we almost always have on our lists in the morning, we kind of say it out loud, and each one will add something in. And this is before we get out of bed. And one is today I want to be of service to others. Define ways to serve other human beings on the planet.
So for the audience, can you go over some of the to-bes?
Well, you mentioned quite a few before, Jerry, about today I'm going to be compassionate, to be gentle, to be open-minded, to be open-hearted, to be
loving.
Yes, right? To be loving, to be joy-filled,
not just
to
loving,
be honest,
unconditional loving,
unconditionally loving. That's right, Jerry.
And to trust in love, and have faith in something that's bigger than yourself.
and have unconditional regard for other human beings, all forms of life.
That's great, and people need to do that, and I think that's worth
And forgiving.
And to be forgiving.
Yes,
Wow.
I mean, I can't believe I left that at the end, because I usually have that right up at
Well,
the
you
beginning.
leave the best for last.
Right,
Yeah.
to be forgiving, to be unjudgmental, to etc.
So a lot of people listening to us that are going through great economic strain, based on the fact that they don't have a job, and are they going to be able to pay for their mortgage? And we like to suggest, if you, for a moment, let go of your body identity, and while you're not looking for a job, find someone to help. Volunteer at a school, volunteer some other place, and you'll find a sense of joy rather than worry about the future. Worry only causes us to attack ourselves and to suffer. And it's a useful tool that the mind, ego mind, uses to keep us in a vice. So we begin to let go of worry, we begin to let go of stress, and we begin to let go of fear when we, again, 100% of ourselves are concentrating on focusing on having peace of mind and giving that as a gift. So when we're working with someone who is dying, or we're working with someone who are dealing with mourning from loss and grief, we feel our words are much less important than the peace and love that we can demonstrate to someone that we're with without feeling a sense of fear. And that's probably more infectious than any virus I know, is expressing and expanding that love.
We're at the bottom of the hour. When we come back, I would like to continue on this discussion about how attitudinal healing can help with stressful situations and with challenging relationships. All right, welcome to Healing in You, and we're enjoying a conversation with world-famous, world-renowned Dr. Jerry Jampolsky, founder of Attitudinal Healing, and Dr. Diane Cirincione, the executive director of Attitudinal Healing International, and we're talking about the topic, letting go of the illusion of separation, and how it pertains to illness, loss and grief, and challenging relationships and stress in our lives. And we were talking about, and we'll be talking a little bit more, we were talking about loss and grief and how even a child applied the principles and dealt with his own ephemeral existence on this earth. But can you tell us how this concept of letting go of the illusion of separation works in terms of people who are dealing with grief? And we were talking about our friend, we have a mutual friend named Phoebe who actually had a lot of loss in her life.
Well, she's a wonderful, wonderful person, and she applied attitudinal healing to many of the most stressful problems you can have. Having a child die, a young child die, and then followed by a divorce, finding her husband had been unfaithful. And she applied, first of all, she honored her humanness. She honored her sadness. But she innately knew that to help other people from what she learned from her own mourning aspect would be helpful. And she came to the center as part of our loss and grief group, where people are together, maybe 9 or 10, 12 people, who are practicing the principles of attitudinal healing, of not making judgments. They're there just to give love, not to give advice, and to see how much healing took place in that. Do you want to add to that, Diane?
Yeah, well, let me just add one thing. If I recall, didn't one of her best friend, who was her boss or her associate, also pass on?
Yes.
She
had multiple losses.
She had multiple losses, and I thought, I don't know how people can handle.
Well, she then turned to service to others and gradually became the executive director of the first Center for Attitudinal Healing in Tiburon, California. I want to mention something that comes to mind about this, and because Terry, a lot of people know that you're an MD and you are a Hawaiian treasure, but a lot of people don't know that you're also an attorney. And And Phoebe was in law school in her second year, as when her child just had a 4-month diagnosis and then died. And it was very traumatic for her. And again, the marriage ended too. And she was coming back, and it was mid-semester, and it was almost impossible to do what she had to do. And she shared this story. She said, you know how competitive law school is, et cetera.
Right.
Everyone's out for themselves, et cetera, and all these things, half of which are not true. We hear about lawyers, because I know some fabulous lawyers, as you do too. But she said that she was in the library, and she was, you know, have you do these, you do like a summary brief of classes and everything, and she was just trying to get some of her stuff together there, and she went to the bathroom one day, and she came back, and no one was around in the library, but on the table was a brief for every single course, that they were all their incredibly detailed notes. She had a stack of them right in front of her. She never knew who gave them to her, but she just burst out crying.
Wow.
And she made it through the second year of law school with
my
this crying.
gosh.
So I think that there's,
Guardian angel.
Yes, well, this miracle, the guardian angel is in each one of us. It's when your heart opens enough, up enough. It doesn't matter who you are or what you're doing. And I think that's a very good example of moving away from the stereotypes we have. And I think lawyers get a really bad rap on it.
Oh,
And
they
indeed,
do.
there are some reasons they deserve to. But by and large, there are some tremendous lawyers in
There
the
are.
world.
Dealing with grief, Cheryl Shohan, about 22 years ago, had a daughter, about 14, who developed cancer of the leg. Chemotherapy helped make that go away. And as that went away, her son developed a different kind of cancer and died.
Oh.
Then the cancer came back to her daughter, and the daughter died.
You're like 11 and
So
13.
you can imagine
Oh.
the kind of grief that someone might have to have your only 2 children, and you would think they would never have another child. 2 years later, they had another child named Joseph, who is now in his 20s, and Dr. Kubler-Ross, who's very close to the family, is the godmother, and I'm the godfather. Now, I suggested to Cheryl and her husband that part of their healing process might be joining and becoming a facilitator for the children's group, where many children are dying and their parents are having great stress around dealing with this. And so as they began to help other parents, they began to even more heal themselves, because when you're helping another person, you forget about your body. You're not
Right.
focusing on your body. You're focusing on love.
Right.
And again, I can't say too often that love is the answer to any problem that we'll ever face in life. And when you really believe that. And another wise thing that one of our kids said, named Bobby, who came to the center for the first time, and he didn't say a word during the interaction with the kids, and then he said, just at the end of the meeting, he said, I just got this diagnosis, and I didn't say anything because I was afraid to say anything, but I see so much love in this room, and I trust the love. So I want to ask everyone, would they send love to me at 1 o'clock on Friday, because I start my chemotherapy then?
Oh, wow.
And everyone said, oh, yeah, we'll be glad to
Sure.
do that.
Wow.
And 2 days later, I got an emergency call from this boy, Bobby, and said, Jerry, you got to call people up and tell them not to send love at 1 o'clock. I said, what do you mean? What's happened? He said, well, they changed my appointment. It's not going to be at 1 o'clock now. It's going to be 4 o'clock. So you can see how much trust he had. And one of the problems that our ego mind has is we don't trust love. We don't have trust in a higher power. We are always feeling that we're going to be hurt. And Bobby's family, imagine, he had an older brother, and then they had a dog that was 13 years old that was dying and vomiting and having diarrhea all over the house. And the parents called me one night and said, our oldest son doesn't want us to do away with the dog, because the veterinarian says you got to do this. And being a sharp psychiatrist who didn't know the answer, I said, why don't you come in and make an appointment and see me this Saturday? And the family came in. We spent about an hour with each other, and my inner guidance, which is not my rational mind, said, I just have a feeling that dynamics will change this week. And if you can bear another week and come back and see me, let's do that. And they agreed. And 3 days later, the older brother called me and said, Jerry, I've changed my mind. I think it's time that the dog be left out of his misery. on one condition. I said, what's that one condition? That you be there. And I said, well, sure, I'll be there. So the family had the awkward thing of calling the veterinarian and saying, we're going to like to have it on Saturday so our psychiatrist can be there. So we go there and we're all holding hands as the dog is put away and feeling a sense of peace and unity, and the veterinarian also holding hands. And about 3 months later, I get a call from the State Veterinarian Association asking me if I could give a talk at this veterinarian center. I said, look, I'm not a veterinarian. I treat humans. He said, well, aren't you the doctor that went to Livermore in California? I said, yeah. He said, well, your veterinarian was so impressed with this because, veterinarians really don't know much about dealing with loss and grief with the people come in with their horses and their cats and their dogs.
Right.
So I said, as long as I bring some kids along. So I brought some kids who had cancer and had pets that died. And we gave a talk, and it was very well received. So it's another way of sharing how one can deal with this, mainly by listening to the other person with love.
That's great.
So much of what we're talking about, though, has to do with belief system. It's what your belief system is and how rigidly held your belief system is. And attitudinal healing is sometimes healing the beliefs that we have about something, the perceptions we have about something. We have no script in attitudinal healing of what someone should believe. That's their own cultural and theological world themselves. Our work is about helping people understand, and your work too, Dr. Shintani, is helping people understand how their minds work and how you make these choices. They don't just happen to you. You are influenced, but you can always change your mind, and it can often change your life. And the second principle of attitudinal healing is so powerful, in relationship to the areas that we're talking about, and that is that we define health as inner peace, and healing as the letting go of fear. And you know that Jerry and I, as well as yourself, have worked well within the medical model. And we developed this very fully with San Francisco General Hospital staff, working with the AIDS epidemic. It was the first residential hospital in the world for AIDS. We did 10 years of AIDS education around the world, did grand rounds in dozens of medical schools, etc. And this concept that you could actually have a higher view of health, that it is your inner peace that you can bring to the situation.
And let me add something.
Yes.
You said health is inner peace, and healing is letting go of fear. And I'm bringing it back to the fear, the basic fear, is that fear of separation, isn't it?
It's always the feelers. Actually, if you think about it, and I'm going to ask our audience to do that, they'll say, oh yeah, but it can't be always. Well, think about any fear that you have or any problem that you have, and then ask yourself the question, what is it that I'm afraid of being separated from? And that will tell you your level of attachment to what's going on. And once you deal with the attachment, that's the power of releasing.
That's amazing. Now, since we were talking about that, can you give an example how that applies to challenging relationships? The concept of the illusion of separation as a way to deal with challenging relationships.
Well, as you know, there are many people that have challenging relationships with their physicians, with their social workers, and there was a person from the Hawaii Center of Attitudinal Healing that was coming because there has been for 2 years, we're doing a workshop there in Attitudinal Healing, and for 2 years she hadn't been able to get over the grief of crying because her son, 40-year-old son, died. And she went to a social worker, and that social worker said, Mimi, you've been crying for 2 years. It's time that you stop crying and get along with life. And so she and I were interacting with each other, and I said, Mimi, I'm a medical doctor, and I can write prescriptions. Yeah, I know that. So I wrote a prescription, and she read it. It says, Mimi, you can cry as much as you want, as long as you want the rest of your life. You make the decisions yourself. Don't let anyone tell you how you're supposed to feel or how you're supposed to experience loss and grief. And I think this is an important aspect of it. I think at times we physicians, in our trying to help people with the grief, tend to give a lot of pills that help them supposedly not being able to experience the depression and the process of grief.
Right.
And I think it's a mistake, really,
It's a mistake,
to take away the process of this. So that's another way. But mainly the thing about relationships is when we listen to the ego mind, we're dealing with the purpose of the ego is to find reasons to separate. So we become fault finders. And we become not love finders, but fault finders. And one of the principles of attitudinal healing is not only forgiving another person, but seeing a person, not interpreting their mind or what they do, but seeing them either as loving, but if they don't appear like loving, to see them as fearful, giving a call of help for love. When you see a relationship that you're having trouble with as fearful, giving a call of help for love, guess what happens? The heart opens up with compassion.
Right, rather than
and
being
kindness.
defensive.
And fighting the
Right.
person back and tagging.
Right, rather than fighting them, your heart opens up and you
So many
respond
of us,
with
yeah.
love.
So right now in politics, wherever you are, whether it's Hawaii or Washington D.C., you see politicians attacking each other, rather than saying what they want to do and what they recommend, rather than attacking. And so I think people are getting somewhat tired about that, but they don't realize that they won't change until we start changing ourselves from attacking and being defensive. I'd like to mention the phone number of the Hawaii Center for Attitudinal Healing. I have it marked down here. It's 808-554-7489. If people are interested in attitudinal healing, want to find more about it, or want to be involved in a support group, they can call that. I'm going to mention again, 808-554-7489.
And also the website.
Yeah, we should
for the
mention
attitude,
websites for the local and the international.
Sure, would you
Yeah,
want me to do
please
that? Well,
do
the
that.
local center, of course, the Hawaii Center for Attitudinal Healing, that's been here for many years. It's ahhawaii.org. And then the international is ahinternational.org.
Yeah, and I think the audience ought to avail themselves of those websites and find out more.
Right. And there's
Yeah,
that's
ongoing
great.
trainings
And I
here.
think there's some free handouts. If they call that number, they can get something by email.
Yes.
Forgot what I was going to say.
Well, I'll say something in the meantime, Jerry, because you were talking about the principles of attitudinal healing, and I thought I would just do a brief definition of attitudinal healing. And it's really, attitudinal healing is a belief system that the realization that it's not other people or events or experiences in our lives, in our past, in our present, that are causing us to be upset in this moment. What's causing us to actually be upset in the moment are our thoughts and attitudes and judgments about those things.
Right.
We can't change the past and what happened, but what we can change and what's actually making us upset now aren't those things, but how we're thinking about them.
Right.
And there's no room for denial here. It's like dealing directly with them and saying,
Right, and
I can do
emphasis
something about
emphasis
this.
on our thoughts.
Our healing, right.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's not about healing somebody else's attitude.
Right.
We all have a long list of attitudes we'd like to heal in
Yeah.
somebody else.
Again, our ego mind is just concerned by thinking you're a body and thinking you're here to always have pain and suffering, rather than being happy and being peaceful. And we just went to a funeral the other day, and oftentimes at funerals, what is said, may this person rest in peace. And I've always felt differently than that, because I think resting in peace is for the living.
Oh, wow.
And
What
we
an
ought-
amazing thought.
And we ought to start doing that.
We should rest in
promoting.
peace now.
Exactly.
There you
Why not?
It's a shift in perception. That's all it is. Change your mind about the way you see
And to
it.
take time to do that. Most of us start the day and running off of bed and we're boom off to the races, rather than learning how to quiet our mind. There's an old Indian statement that says, a sick mind is a busy mind, a healthy mind is a slow mind, and a still mind is a divine mind.
Oh,
So
wow.
learning how to still our minds is so important, to take
very
that
important.
time, and we can have that still mind even when chaos is going on around us. We can learn to be peaceful even when chaos is going on.
Those are amazing concepts that if people would only apply, they could deal with, well, grief, relationships, all kinds of difficult, challenging situations.
Not people, you and I, and
Yes.
here. We put it ourselves.
It's never about other people. It's
easy to
always
say.
about
If all
ourselves.
those people out there would do it, but it's really learning to retrain the mind and know that no one's there all the time. But the more we go on that track, the more that we wake up in the day and says, love and forgiveness is going to be my pathway.
So healing relationships, let's say there have been relationships that have been uh, rendered asunder from in family. You know, a lot of people that I deal with, for example, are boomers and older. And, you know, I think you know as well as I do, many of them have had uh, issues with family members or close people who were once close and now are somehow uh, apart from them. How do you begin the process of healing? I suppose you're going to say it starts with yourself.
Yes, it has to
And it
do.
ends with yourself.
I think the first step is to want peace of mind as your only goal, number one. And then to recognize that justified anger does not bring you that peace, that there is another way of looking at the world and what you see. It's possible to not take yourself so seriously and acting as a god to determine who's guilty and who's innocent and be a fault finder. It's possible to wake up the day and choose choose peace rather than conflict.
And not be attached to the outcome, once again.
Yeah, and choose love rather than conflict. To choose to be a love finder rather than a fault finder. And choose to be a love giver rather than a love seeker. Much of us are seeking love and tend to find fault in other people. And love can only be obtained when we are giving the love and reminding ourselves that the giving in the same, because everyone is really part of ourselves. There's no separation of all of life. And when we start to believe that, and start to not only believe it, but know that, then we start to be more joyful in our lives, and we don't take ourselves so seriously, and we're not there always on the workaholism. Nothing. You and I talked about that earlier. Oftentimes, workaholism hides our feelings, really. So we're so busy, we don't have a chance to process our feelings.
Now, let me ask you a kind of maybe a detailed question, and this may be important for some people to discern the importance of how do I say it, not being attached. But what's the difference between attachment and commitment? Because in certain situations you need to have a commitment to something. So,
Mm-hmm.
Like a marriage or a relationship or a certain outcome, and at the same time you want to be committed but not attached. It's kind of an interesting concept.
Right, exactly. Well, commitment is an ongoing mental choice, an emotional and spiritual choice that you make, and you're constantly renewing it. Even though you say, I'll commit to you for the rest of my life, the reality is that every day you're recommitting. Otherwise, once you stop that, you're not committing. So it's an ongoing thing. The attachment is where we get sort of stuck. And I have to say, Jerry and I are like totally attached to each other. We love each other so much. We're together 95% of the time. We're married. We have 30 years together, and we are attached. And we laugh at that sometimes. You go, oh gosh, let's just give up. We're just attached to each other. But the reality is that, really, in all seriousness, though, we have to constantly release that, because as you attached, it doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you're not committed. It means it's a belief system in how you hold the other person. Yeah, I hold Jerry as part of myself, but I also hold him as, part of the world, part of the universe. Maybe you want to answer that, Jerry.
I would say that Diane and I, when we first met and became serious with each other, made a commitment to each other. That in our relationships we would take responsibility for our feelings, and that we would commit ourselves to do our very best to never say words or thoughts or actions that would be hurtful to each other.
Never use words as weapons.
And that comes from the will. The ego, however, would make an attachment. If I'm attached to chocolate, it's like crazy glue that my ego feels I can't be happy unless I have chocolate.
Or attached to being right.
Or I can't be happy unless Diane is with me. So the attachment, the ego, I have to go to the bathroom with her, because we're attached to each other. So I would tend to define it in that kind of way. And as we learn to let go of our attachments and not see value in them, and believe that anything is possible, that nothing is impossible when it comes to the mind, and the mind is limitless, And this is the marvelous thing about the mind, and that we can make our imagination real, that this offers us the freedom, and it's forgiveness that sets us free from attachments, forgiving ourselves and not feeling a sense of that emptiness, to know that our gas tank, in terms of our heart, is always full of love, as long as we give that love away and act as conduits. If we can see ourselves as messengers of love and messengers of light, all the fears about death, all the fears about anxiety or what might happen next disappear, because we're living in this eternal moment of now. This is the only moment that counts. And people who are dying in our center, who live in the present and don't live in the past and the future, are the ones that tend to be peaceful. They tend to laugh a lot more, and they tend to die with a lot more peace.
And would you say that if you take it to that spiritual level, if we see things see each other as spiritual beings, like you say, we are never separated. So the commitment doesn't have to end, but then the attachment to this earth can be released.
I think it can be, and I think one of the reasons we don't forgive relationships, and I think healing, one of the reasons we're here is to heal the relationships we have. One of the reasons people don't want to heal them, or are afraid to heal them, or don't know how to heal them, is because they think that it has a certain form to it. That, oh, if I heal the relationship, I have to be back with this abusive person, and I don't really want to do this. So again, as we talk about in the book on forgiveness, the greatest healer of all, is that forgiveness doesn't have a form to it. You can completely heal the relationship with another person in your mind and in your heart, and never see them again. You just ask for wisdom about what you should do. And I noticed that we just have a minute or two left.
When I helped start the Center of Attitudinal Healing in 1975, and I'll be brief, I felt that people who are suffering loss and grief needed a place, so they came to my house. And it gave them a safe place to be insane. So they could say that, you know, I hear my husband every night, or my husband's in bed with me last night. So I think it's important to realize that we need to give people permission to not be in what they consider normal rage.
Anyway, we're just about out of time. We've had a wonderful session with you. Do you want to say a few last comments to our audience? We've got about a minute left.
Okay, now let's just start.
I'll just say that, I mean, the bottom line, it's hard to believe, but that the attitude that you have about life is literally everything. And as you heal that attitude, as you shift that attitude, your life will change. But if you don't want to change your own mind, your life's never going to change.
I would say that I would like to remind the listening audience that they can choose to be angry the rest of their lives, or they can learn from children who may be playing with another kid, and the other kid wants to play with and steals his toy, and the kid gets out, never going to play with him again, and then 2 minutes later he's out there playing with him, where we adults, maybe 7 years, 10 years, will say, well, I'm never going to forgive that person until he dies.
Right, we need to be more childlike, but not childish.
You got that one right.
All right, I want to thank our viewing audience and our listening audience. I want to thank Dr. Jampolsky and Dr. Cirencioni, the founder and executive director of Attitudinal Healing, for being with us. I want to thank all our viewers and listeners this evening, and I wish you the best of health and the Lord's blessings always. Aloha.
And we want to thank you for this program. Thank you.
Thank
Mahalo,
you.
Dr.
Thank you.
Shintani.
Mahalo, and mahalo, everyone.
For more information about Attitudinal Healing, go to www.ahinternational.org, and for programs and support groups in Hawaii, go to ahhawaii.org. Once again, for information about Attitudinal Healing, go to ahinternational.org, and for programs and support groups in Hawaii, go to ahhawaii.org. We thank you for watching, and we wish you the best of health.